The Attitude Era, known as the greatest era in the history of professional wrestling to many, many fans. An era that was able to put to bed WCW and keep WWE as the greatest wrestling company on the planet, which to this day still remains a fact. The Attitude Era gave birth to many stars like Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock, who many consider as the greatest wrestlers of all time. Not only that, it gave birth to D-Generation X, one of the greatest factions of all time, and also one of the greatest villains in real life and in wrestling, known as Vincent Kennedy McMahon. But there is one man who is often forgotten when we talk about the Attitude Era, and that man is Bret the Hitman Hart. In my opinion, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, and my personal favourite wrestler of all time. In this video we're going to go through why Bret Hart was one of the biggest reasons for the Attitude Era even happening. Many people don't even consider him as part of the Attitude Era, but I believe he was integral to its creation and the start and its pinnacle. So let's go through it, and let's start with Stone Cold Steve Austin. Many of you may know that Stone Cold Steve Austin was originally with WCW. He also spent time in ECW. His character was not the best. He was known as Stunning Steve Austin, clearly way different from the Austin we know and love now, and he was very misused by WCW. When eventually Austin was looking for a new company to sign with, it was Bret Hart who went to Vince McMahon and said, "Why are we not picking this guy up?" So in a way, Bret Hart was the reason that Austin was hired. Of course, he's not the only reason, and there would have been other factors going into it. Austin was of course very talented, and WWE would have had their eye on him. But Bret Hart giving that approval and push for WWE to sign him would have been a major reason for this happening. And when Bret Hart did eventually face Stone Cold Steve Austin, it was at Survivor Series, which wasn't a perfect match, but it set up their match at WrestleMania 13, which is known as the greatest match, if not one of the greatest matches in the history of wrestling. It was brutal, it was violent, it was, for some people, the start of the Attitude Era. Some people consider the start of the Attitude Era from WrestleMania 13 and ending at WrestleMania 17. Others would differ on what their opinion is, but I think it started when Austin gave the 316 promo, and I would say it ended at WrestleMania 17. So Bret was not only important in the hiring of Stone Cold Steve Austin, he was also important in creating the character as we know now. The bloody face he had at the end of that match at WrestleMania 13 is an image we all remember, one of the most iconic wrestling images of all time, and Bret Hart was contributed to that. Austin would become known as the face of the Attitude Era and one of the biggest stars in wrestling history, even to this day. He essentially saved WWE from losing the Monday Night Wars to WCW, and I think he owes a lot to Bret Hart, who helped him become what he became. We also need to talk about wrestling's biggest villain, Vince McMahon. I understand that McMahon is currently under massive public scrutiny, and rightfully so. I mean, what he did, or what is alleged to do, is awful, and if he's found guilty, then of course lock him away. But we cannot forget that he was the greatest villain during the Attitude Era. His rivalry with Bret Hart and Austin was just incredible, especially with Austin. It's gone down as the greatest rivalries in history. But we have to also ask ourselves, where did the Mr. McMahon character come from? Before the Attitude Era, Mr. McMahon used to be a normal leader, a normal CEO. He would commentate matches, and he wasn't evil or an evil character or anything. He was just a normal boss who would just promote the product and try to make it the best it could be. And that's where Bret Hart comes in. Bret Hart was what created the Mr. McMahon character. The Montreal Screwjob, one of the most controversial moments in the history of wrestling, I would say the most controversial. It turned the fans against Mr. McMahon and forced him to become what we know as Mr. McMahon character. And that's what resulted in the Attitude Era hitting its peak, because the highest viewed episode of the Attitude Era was when Austin took on McMahon in a match, and it was also the first time that WWE beat WCW in the ratings for quite a while. So Bret Hart contributing to the face of the Attitude Era and the heel of the Attitude Era is huge, and I think it's something that's very, very overlooked. Bret Hart was part of that Attitude Era, and he helped develop it and helped it become what it was. Bret Hart didn't even want to leave WWE at the time. For those of you who don't know, his contract was ended because it cost McMahon too much money. So Bret Hart was kind of forced to go to WCW, a time where he didn't really want to. Of course, when the Screwjob happened, he was more than happy to leave, and he had a bitter taste in his mouth over what happened with Shawn Michaels and McMahon. Bret Hart was also the first person to refer to D-Generation X as degenerates. He helped contribute to their name, As we know now, D-Generation X were a massive part of the Attitude Era, started by Shawn Michaels, Triple H and Chyna. They were iconic. They got people like Road Dogg and Billy Gunn involved, just to name a few. Even Mike Tyson was temporarily part of them. It was just Bret Hart who helped contribute to these things. His rivalry with Shawn Michaels, in my opinion, is the best rivalry of all time, and was also technically part of the Attitude Era. This whole reason that I've given today is why Bret Hart is severely overlooked as a legend. I feel like he doesn't get the respect he deserves. I know a lot of people love his in-ring work and how fantastic he was, but in terms of his mic work, I feel like he doesn't get the respect he deserves. The way he exploded at Mr. McMahon multiple times on camera was a hint or a preview of what the Attitude Era was to be between Austin and McMahon themselves. Of course, Bret also got screwed by the Montreal Screwjob, as I mentioned before. Not only that, his brother Owen Hart, as many know, did pass away in the middle of a pay-per-view, which WWE didn't even stop the pay-per-view. They carried it going, which was a very, very controversial thing that happened, mainly due to Mr. McMahon's decision that the show must go on. But I think that we need to give Bret Hart the respect he deserves. He was a massive part of the Attitude Era, and in my opinion, he technically did start the Attitude Era. I know there were many reasons for the Attitude Era happening, one of them being the fact that they were losing to WCW in the ratings and they needed to win, but I think Bret Hart was one of the main reasons that it happened in the way that it did. I think that Mr. McMahon character and the Austin character were integral to the Attitude Era, and they owe a lot of their characters to Bret Hart and the work he did with them. And also we need to talk about The Rock, the People's Champion, the Brahma Bull, another big part of the Attitude Era. He has publicly stated that Bret Hart stuck up for him backstage. We can assume from rumors that Triple H and Shawn Michaels used to bully The Rock and keep him from becoming a big star, and it was Bret Hart who stuck up for him. The Rock even thanked him publicly in an interview he did while he was promoting his movie Jungle Cruise. So I think not only Stone Cold being helped hired by WWE, and McMahon becoming what he became, and also The Rock mentioning that he was stuck up for by Bret Hart backstage, it just goes to show that Bret Hart helped create these characters, because if Bret Hart didn't stick up for The Rock, who knows, maybe The Rock gave up and decided to pursue another path. Maybe The Rock would have been buried and they never would have given him an opportunity. So I think we need to keep all of these factors in mind. There's probably other things I am forgetting, but these are four of the biggest reasons that he contributed to that era, which is known as the greatest era in wrestling. I know a lot of people are talking about this current era that Triple H is in charge of, and maybe that one day can overtake the Attitude Era, but in my opinion, to this day, the Attitude Era will remain above all, and Bret Hart, my favorite wrestler of all time, one of the best wrestlers of all time, was one of the biggest contributors to it. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.